What would you do if 12 minutes erased everything you built in 5 years? Charlotte Hayes was loyal, quiet, and hardworking until a single accusation destroyed her career, her confidence, and her place in the world. Graham Bennett had power, wealth, and a locked heart until an unexpected encounter forced him to question what truly mattered. When two lives from opposite worlds collided in the most unexpected way, they had to face choices no one prepares you for. Would you walk away to protect someone you care about, even if it breaks you? Would you dare to build something new, even when the past keeps knocking? This is not a story of fairy tale romance. It's a story about dignity, about finding light after loss, about the quiet bravery of starting again and choosing love, not because it's easy, but because it's true. If this journey touches something in you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply stay a little longer with us. Now, let me tell you the story of how Charlotte and Graham found their way through silence, storms, and a garden full of second chances. 12 minutes. That's all it took to erase 5 years of Charlotte Hayes' quiet dedication, loyalty, and hard work. In just 12 minutes, her name was reduced to a rumor, and her reputation to ash. The office felt colder than usual that morning. Maybe it was the air conditioning, humming overhead with sterile indifference. Or maybe it was the way people glanced at her desk and then quickly looked away. Something was off, and Charlotte could feel it in her bones, that quiet tightening of the chest before a storm breaks. At exactly 8:42 a.m., her phone chimed with a calendar alert. Meeting HR, room 303. No context, no names, just 3 gray words that would mark the unraveling of everything she had built. Room 303 sat at the end of a hallway lined with inspirational posters that had faded with time. Teamwork makes the dream work. Integrity matters. We rise by lifting others. Charlotte had always believed in those phrases. She used to repeat them in her head during late nights at the office, especially when she missed her mother's evening tea or turned down a friend's birthday dinner to meet a deadline. When she stepped into the room, she was met with polite nods and stiff smiles. A man from HR she barely knew introduced himself again as if it were a formality before surgery, and then, with clipped precision, delivered the verdict. A confidential blueprint from a high-profile residential design had been leaked. The design was distinctive, ambitious, the kind of work that could define a firm's legacy. And according to their internal investigation, the leak could be traced to Charlotte's account, her login, her computer, her name. She blinked. They showed her timestamps, IP logs, and file access history. It was all so cleanly presented, like a PowerPoint prepared for a boardroom. No anger, no accusation in their tone, just a detached statement of facts. But none of it was the truth. She knew who had done it, and she knew why. But proving it would take more time than she had, and they were not offering time. They were offering a choice: resign quietly, or be terminated with cause. Charlotte chose silence. There was no dramatic outburst, no storming out. She simply nodded, signed the paper they slid across the table, and walked back to her desk for the last time. A few eyes peeked from over cubicle walls, then quickly dipped away again. Her desk had always been modest, just a small framed photo of her mother in the garden, a miniature cactus that had somehow survived 4 years of office lighting, and a worn leather notebook filled with sketches, scribbles, and ideas she never had time to polish. She packed slowly, folding each paper like it mattered, wrapping the mug her mother had painted years ago in her scarf to keep it from breaking. Each item was more than just an object. It was a little piece of her time there, a little piece of her that hadn't been valued enough to be defended. The box was light, yet it felt impossibly heavy in her arms. When the elevator dinged on the ground floor, she stepped out into the lobby, where the hum of printers and clatter of keyboards had been replaced by the distant sound of traffic and the whisper of rain on the windows. She paused in front of the revolving doors, taking a long breath. Outside, Charleston was wrapped in a soft gray mist, the kind that blurred the edges of buildings and turned headlights into glowing orbs. Across the street was Maddie's Cafe, where she and her coworkers used to gather every Friday. The thought of walking in there now, alone, was almost too much to bear. She shifted the box in her arms. A paperclip fell through a crack and hit the floor with a tiny click, such a small sound, but it echoed inside her like a gunshot. She didn't stoop to pick it up. Her phone buzzed against her hip. At first, she ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. She set the box down on a nearby bench and glanced at the screen. Unknown number, voicemail left. Then a text appeared. Ms. Hayes, this is Dr. Rosen's office at Charleston General. We need to discuss your mother's condition. Please call us as soon as possible. Her throat tightened. Not now, not today, but trouble rarely respected timing. Charlotte stared at the mist outside, the sidewalk she'd have to step onto, the life waiting for her on the other side of the glass. She thought of her mother's hands, strong but fragile now, more bone than skin, always smelling faintly of lavender and tea leaves. She thought of the unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, the outdated insurance plan, the quiet resignation in her mother's eyes that made Charlotte want to scream. She looked down at the box again. The frame photo on top had shifted, showing a younger Charlotte, beaming beside her mother in a sunlit garden. That was 5 years ago, the same amount of time she'd spent in this building, giving and giving, hoping it might mean something. A security guard opened the revolving door for her. She stepped through it slowly, the glass spinning in silence, and walked out into the rain. It wasn't pouring, not yet, just a soft drizzle, the kind that clung to your coat and made you feel like you were being watched by the sky itself. She didn't run, she didn't hide. She walked to the curb and stood there, waiting for the next step to make itself known. Inside her coat pocket, her fingers curled around her phone. She would call the hospital. She would figure it out. She always did. But first, just for a moment, Charlotte looked up. The sky above Charleston was a flat, endless gray, heavy with the promise of something not yet said, and she wondered, quietly to herself, how much more she could carry. Some daughters bring home awards. Charlotte brought home hope even if it was running low. The gravel crunched beneath her boots as she pulled into the driveway of the old farmhouse. It sat quietly on the edge of town, just beyond where the city thinned into open fields and slow mornings. The paint was beginning to peel in spots, and the porch steps creaked under her weight, same as they had for years. But it was home, and for now, it was all she had left. Inside, the air held the faint scent of cinnamon and something floral lavender, maybe a soft, familiar mix that wrapped around her like a worn quilt. Her mother had always believed that a house should smell lived in, not like lemon disinfectant or cold marble, but like Sunday pies and chamomile tea. Charlotte. The voice came from the back room, gentle and a little winded. I'm here, Mama. She dropped her keys into the ceramic dish by the door, the one shaped like a sunflower. Her mother had made it in a community pottery class years ago. One of the petals had chipped, but neither of them ever bothered to glue it back. In the bedroom, her mother sat in her worn recliner, a quilt over her legs and a half-finished crossword puzzle on the side table. Her hair was thinner now, pulled back in a soft bun, and her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her reading glasses. You look tired, her mother said, peering at her. Rough day at work. Charlotte smiled that same practice smile she'd learned as a teenager when she didn't want to worry anyone. Just one of those Mondays. She crouched beside the chair and took her mother's hand. The skin was cool, papery. The veins looked like rivers on a faded map. You hungry? Charlotte asked. Only if there's applesauce, her mother replied with a wink. Charlotte moved to the kitchen, flipping on the light. The room was cozy, unchanged for years, cream-colored cabinets, a round wooden table, and a curtain above the sink that fluttered in the breeze. A pot of cinnamon sticks simmered on the back burner, scenting the whole space like autumn. She opened the fridge, found a jar of homemade applesauce, her mother's favorite, and scooped some into a dish. On her way back, she paused at the back window. The garden was still there, though overgrown now. Tomatoes, rosemary, daisies, remnants of summers past. She remembered planting them as a girl, dirt under her nails, her mother humming a hymn in the background. Back in the living room, they ate quietly. Outside, a mockingbird sang its borrowed tunes, and the floor clock ticked its steady rhythm. They sat on the front porch after dinner, wrapped in sweaters, mugs of tea cradled in their hands. The wooden swing creaked as it moved. It was the same swing Charlotte had sat on the night her father passed, the same one where her mother held her hand and said, "We just keep going, baby, one breath, one step, tonight." The stars hadn't come out yet. The sky was a pale canvas, tinged in gray-blue, with clouds hovering like unspoken words. Her mother turned to her. "You're quiet." Charlotte hesitated, just thinking about what she looked down at her mug, about how things change, how fast it can all go. Her mother reached over, squeezing her hand gently. "We lose things, jobs, plans, even people. But we don't lose who we are, not unless we let go of it." Charlotte swallowed hard. Her mother didn't know. She hadn't told her, not yet. When bedtime came, Charlotte helped her into bed, fluffed the pillows, and kissed her forehead. "I'm glad you're here," her mother whispered. "Me too, Mama," Charlotte replied. "Me too." She waited until her mother's breathing steadied before slipping outside again. The mailbox stood crooked at the edge of the driveway, leaning slightly like an old man with a bad hip. Inside, she found 3 envelopes. 2 were grocery flyers. The third bore the hospital's insignia. Her stomach dropped. Under the porch light, she tore it open. "Claim denied, coverage lapsed." She read the words twice, then a third time, her eyes scanning for something, anything that might soften the blow. But there it was, cold, clinical, final. She sank onto the porch steps. The letter crumpled in her lap. The wind picked up, rustling the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. But here, in this moment, all Charlotte could hear was the thud of her heartbeat and the low hum of panic rising in her chest. This wasn't just a bill. It was a warning, a cliff's edge. She couldn't tell her mother. Not yet. Not when she'd just gotten her to eat and smile and sleep through a full night. She needed to protect that peace for as long as she could. Later that night, in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded wallpaper and an old dresser still covered in high school trophies, Charlotte powered up her laptop. Her fingers trembled as she typed. Part-time jobs, Charleston SC, flexible hours, immediate pay. She scrolled through listings. Most were dead-ends retail shifts that started in a week, babysitting jobs too far from home. Then, one caught her eye. Need on-site event assistant, urgent, one-day gig, tomorrow, must be reliable and presentable, background and admin or design preferred, 160-day. She clicked, apply, no hesitation, no pride, just necessity. Seconds later, her phone buzzed with confirmation. Job accepted. Arrival instructions to follow. Charlotte leaned back against the headboard, the letter from the hospital still on her nightstand. She stared at the ceiling for a long while, listening to the wind brush against the house, to Winston purring softly from the hallway, as if even the cat knew she was holding too much. Outside, the mockingbird had gone quiet. But inside, Charlotte whispered to the dark, "I'll figure it out. Mama, I promise." She didn't expect to see a man like Graham Bennett in the flesh, and she definitely didn't expect to spill coffee on his 4,000 jacket. The instructions were simple. Arrive at 7:30 sharp, black slacks, white blouse, low heels, hair pulled back, no perfume, minimal jewelry, bring ID and a smile. Charlotte read the email 3 times before she set her alarm for 5:45. It had been a long time since she had to prepare for a job that involved anything other than spreadsheets and AutoCAD drafts. But this was different, temporary, impersonal, transactional. And yet, it carried the weight of something she couldn't name. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was desperation dressed in professionalism. By the time she pulled up to the towering glass building that housed Bennett and Cross, The sun had just begun to peek over the rooftops of this downtown Charleston. The city looked polished and unbothered, unaware that a woman with shaking hands and a heart full of fear was walking through its lobby doors with a name badge that said, Event Temp. The front desk sent her up to the 19th floor, where the firm's architectural showcase was being held. Models of sleek skyscrapers, sprawling eco-villages, and high-end urban developments lined the tables, each under a glass case, each lit by soft spotlights. It smelled faintly of cedar and fresh coffee. A woman in a tight black dress and headset motioned her over. "You're the coffee station," she said, barely glancing up from her clipboard. "Keep it full. Keep it clean. Don't engage unless spoken to." Charlotte nodded, already heading to the far corner of the room, where a long linen-covered table displayed 2 commercial-grade carafes, a row of ceramic cups, and 3 types of sweeteners. It was menial work. She'd once coordinated million-dollar showroom launches, but today, she was just another pair of hands. By 8:45, the room began to fill, mostly men in tailored suits, their voices low and calculated, a few women sharply dressed, deliberate in their movement. Every now and then, someone would murmur, "Graham's presenting today," or "Bennett himself will be here." Charlotte didn't think much of it. In her world, the boss was a figure that stayed hidden behind emails and glass doors. That was before he walked in. Graham Bennett didn't enter the room. He commanded it, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal jacket and pale blue shirt, clean-shaven, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of early frost. He moved through the crowd like he owned the air, not arrogant, but absolute. A man people noticed even when he said nothing. Charlotte didn't breathe, not for a second. He stopped 3 feet from her, mid-conversation with a group of investors. His voice was steady, textured, the kind that could quiet a room without needing to raise itself. She turned to refill the decaf carafe. Her hand brushed the edge of a sugar packet. It slid off the table, and as she reached to catch it, her elbow nudged the full coffee pot. The carafe tipped, splashing a dark arc of liquid onto the crisp white tablecloth, and straight onto the left sleeve of Graham Bennett's $4,000 jacket. Silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that falls gently. It was the kind that slams the air out of a room. 20 people stopped talking. 3 stopped walking. 1 held their breath with a paper cup halfway to their lips. Charlotte froze. Then, and only then, she moved. She grabbed a clean napkin, stepped forward without a word, and began blotting the sleeve with gentle precision. No fumbling apologies, no excuses, just quiet focus and a bowed head. "I am so sorry," she said, finally. Her voice was even, controlled. She didn't look up. Graham watched her. His mouth twitched slightly, not with anger, but something harder to read. Amusement, intrigue. "It's just coffee," he said softly. Then louder, to the group, "Accidents happen." There was a collective exhale in the room. Conversations resumed, though at a lower hum. Charlotte finished wiping the edge of the table, then stepped back. "Would you like a fresh jacket sent up, sir?" One assistant asked nervously. Graham shook his head. "The presentation doesn't require sleeves." He turned, continued walking toward the display wall, and never looked back. Charlotte stood there, cheeks burning, but dry. She didn't crumble, not outwardly, but inside. Her thoughts ran wild. "You ruined this. You should have stayed home. You're not made for this anymore." She busied herself with refilling the carafes, checking the sugar supply, adjusting the napkin holder 3 times in a row. No one else mentioned it. No one offered comfort. That wasn't part of this world. When the presentation ended an hour later, Charlotte helped clean up quietly, as instructed. She left through the service elevator, clutching her event badge and an envelope with cash, $160 counted to the penny. Back at home, her mother was watching a cooking show on low volume, knitting half a scarf that had been almost done for 3 winters. How was it? Baby Charlotte paused, then smiled. Uneventful. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, she sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and her laptop. The temporary staffing platform pinged with a notification. New message, Bennett and Cross. Subject follow-up request, Body, Mr. Bennett would like to meet with you tomorrow at 10 in his office. Please confirm availability. Charlotte stared at the screen, then blinked. No details, no explanation, just a line that promised either another mistake or something she couldn't yet name. No woman dreams of becoming someone's temporary secretary, but when life demands, pride makes room for survival. Charlotte stood outside the glass door of Bennett and Cross, fingers curled tightly around the strap of her worn leather bag. Her reflection stared back at her sleepless eyes, pressed blouse, and a face that hadn't smiled properly in days. She had confirmed the appointment, 10 sharp. The email had no context, no apology, no hint of kindness, just a name, a time, and the weight of possibility. When she stepped inside, the receptionist waved her through almost immediately. No waiting, no questions, just a quiet, "He's expecting you," and a nod toward the elevator. The ride to the 24th floor felt longer than the 30 seconds it took. Her breath was shallow. Her heart, louder than the soft jazz piping through the elevator speakers. His office was a world-apart minimalist, but commanding. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Charleston harbor, and morning light poured in like judgment. Graham Bennett stood behind a wide oak desk, sleeves rolled, jacket on the chair behind him, reading glasses perched on his nose as he flipped through a file. He looked up the moment she entered. "Miss Hayes," he said. Not unkindly. "Thank you for coming." She didn't sit until he gestured. There was a beat of silence before he spoke again. "I owe you an apology." That caught her off guard. "For the coffee?" she asked, trying to soften the moment. "No," he replied. "For how I handled what came after." She tilted her head slightly. "I asked you here because I believe I have an offer you might want to consider." Charlotte stiffened. "I'm assembling a small, confidential project team," he continued. "It's delicate, time-sensitive, demands precision, discretion, and someone who can manage chaos without making it look like chaos." He slid a folder across the desk. "I need a temporary executive assistant. For 6 months, possibly longer, but that's the initial scope." She opened the folder, found a brief summary of the project. Residential redesign for an overseas client, ultra-high-end, highly confidential, rapid delivery, deadlines tight, eyes on them constantly. "This is a full-time role?" she asked quietly. "It is." Her throat tightened. I have my mother at home. I'm her primary caregiver." He nodded. "I anticipated that. Which is why the position includes residence at our corporate estate. A guest wing, private entrance, bedroom, office. Your mother is welcome to come." Charlotte blinked. He watched her closely. "I'm not doing this out of pity." "I didn't say you were," she replied, more sharply than intended. He let that sit, then leaned forward. "I watched how you handled yourself at that event. Most people panic, make a scene, offer excuses. You didn't. You took ownership, handled it cleanly, and left without complaint. That tells me more about your character than a resume ever could." She swallowed hard. "You've worked in design. You know how to read plans. You understand aesthetic and flow. I don't need someone to answer phones and schedule meetings. I need someone who can anticipate needs, spot what's out of place, and fix it before I know it's broken." The room was so still. She could hear the creak of the old leather chair beneath her, and the compensation she asked finally, trying not to sound too hopeful. He quoted a number. Her breath caught. That amount would cover her mother's next surgery. And then some? She looked down at the folder again. Her name wasn't printed anywhere, but in that moment, it felt like it was meant for her. "I'll need a day," she said softly. Graham didn't push. Of course. He stood as she rose, held out his hand, firm, but not forceful. "Whatever you decide," he added, "you've already earned my respect." That night, Charlotte sat on the back porch with her mother. The porch light buzzed softly overhead, moths flickering in and out of its glow. Crickets sang somewhere beyond the fence. The wooden swing creaked beneath their weight, just like it used to when she was a child. She didn't mention the job, not yet. Instead, She asked about her mother's favorite memories of the house, about the fig tree that never bore fruit, the summer thunderstorm that knocked out power for 3 days, the first time Charlotte had tried to ride a bike and fallen into the rose bushes. Laughter mingled with memory, and when her mother nodded off, Charlotte stayed there, arms wrapped around her knees, looking out at the quiet world. She thought about the word secretary, how small it had once sounded, how undeserved, but now it felt like a bridge, maybe even a lifeline. At midnight, she packed her suitcase. Not much, just the essentials: a framed photo, her mother's medication, a set of clean notebooks. She didn't sleep. Instead, she watched the sky lighten over the neighborhood. The familiar turned unfamiliar, as if preparing to say goodbye. Tomorrow, she would enter a world of order and glass and rules she didn't understand, a world that wasn't hers. But maybe, just maybe, she could find a place in it, if not for herself, then for the woman asleep in the next room. The house was quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that echoed with things unsaid. Charlotte stood in the entryway of the Rose Hill Drive estate, suitcase in hand, her mother's medication bag tucked under her arm. The door had opened with a soft click, not a creak. Everything inside seemed too still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The foyer was grand without being ostentatious white oak floors, soft cream walls, a staircase with wrought iron railings that curved like a ribbon. A vase of white lilies sat on a side table, perfectly arranged, but the petals had started to brown at the edges, like no one had bothered to replace them. She took a few tentative steps inside. The air was cool, scented faintly with old wood, and something more elusive, maybe cedar, or bergamot, or just the echo of solitude. A house this size should have been filled with noise shoes clacking on marble, laughter bouncing down hallways, a dog barking in the yard. But here, every step she took sounded too loud, too deliberate. The guest wing was down a narrow hallway past the main staircase. Graham had arranged for it to be fully stocked before she arrived: fresh linens, basic toiletries, a small office nook with a sleek laptop already logged into the company network. It was efficient, well-designed, even thoughtful. But it didn't feel warm. Her mother would arrive the next morning. For tonight, it was just her and the quiet. After unpacking slow and methodical, more out of anxiety than need, Charlotte wandered the halls, letting the house show her who it was. The library came first. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with everything from biographies of old presidents to rare books bound in cracked leather. A brass reading lamp sat on a walnut desk, casting a golden halo. No dust, but also no bookmarks, no mugs, no sign anyone had sat here to lose themselves in a story. The kitchen was next, impeccable. Marble counters, chef-grade appliances, an untouched fruit bowl arranged like it had been plucked from a catalog. The refrigerator was stocked with bottled water, fresh herbs, eggs in neat rows, but the stovetop gleamed too clean, no trace of spills or oil or meals made with someone in mind. Out back, a balcony overlooked the Ashley River. From here, the city lights flickered just beyond the marshes, and the sky held a soft indigo glow as dusk crept in. The railing was cool beneath her fingers. A breeze stirred her hair, and for a moment, she let herself pretend this was her life, not a borrowed moment. She didn't hear Graham until he cleared his throat behind her. She turned, startled. He stood a few feet away, not in a suit, not in cufflinks or polished shoes, but in a navy sweater, worn at the elbows, and dark jeans that looked as if they'd seen many quiet Saturdays. He looked tired, not unwell, just human, real. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said. "It's all right," she replied, brushing hair from her face. "This view, it's incredible. I never use it," he admitted, walking to the railing beside her. "Too many evenings inside, too many deadlines." There was a pause, not awkward, just present. "I ordered dinner," he said. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I kept it simple." They ate in the formal dining room, not at opposite ends of a long mahogany table, like scenes from old movies. but at one corner, plates between them, the silence filled with the sound of silverware and the occasional soft clearing of a throat. The meal was good: roast chicken, sweet potatoes with rosemary, sautéed green beans, likely catered, but thoughtfully chosen. At one point, a soft rustling caught Charlotte's attention. A shadow moved at the doorway. Then, with the grace of royalty, a long-haired gray cat stepped into the room. It paused, looked her over, then hopped gracefully onto the window bench. "Winston," Graham said, noticing her gaze. "He doesn't usually come out when there are guests." "He's beautiful," she murmured. "He's the only one who knows all my secrets," Graham said with a faint smile. "And he keeps them all." Winston blinked, unimpressed. Charlotte reached out a tentative hand, but the cat remained just out of reach, watching, assessing. They finished the meal with mugs of herbal tea. No dessert, no small talk. It wasn't unfriendly, just cautious. Later, as she stood in the doorway of the library, about to head back to her wing, Graham appeared again as if drawn by gravity. "You'll be living here," he said softly. "Not just for work. I hope you'll make this space yours. Use the kitchen, read the books, take up room." She nodded, unsure what to say. He looked past her, toward the dim glow of the desk lamp. "I built this place thinking I needed peace. But peace isn't the absence of sound. Sometimes it's just loneliness in disguise." Charlotte's breath caught. "I need help," he continued, "not just with the project, with this house, with myself." It wasn't a romantic plea. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. "I want to remember what it feels like to belong, not just to a company or a title, but to something real." She didn't answer right away, just looked at him, really looked, not the CEO, not the client, but the man who ordered rosemary potatoes and didn't know how to use his own balcony. "I'll do my best," she said quietly. That night, Charlotte lay in the guest room, beneath crisp sheets in a bed too large for one person. She watched the ceiling for a long time. Outside, Charleston hummed faint city sounds, a distant train, the sigh of wind through trees. Her mother would arrive in the morning. The project would begin, schedules, reports, meetings. But right now, the quiet pressed in again. Only this time, it didn't feel so hollow. It felt like the breath before something new. A different life was starting. One no one least of all Charlotte could have predicted. Some mornings speak louder than words, and Charlotte was starting to hear things she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She had always believed in quiet rituals, folding clothes while the kettle boiled, writing to-do lists in ink instead of typing them, pressing flowers between pages of forgotten books. But nothing quite prepared her for how comforting it would feel to find a fresh cup of coffee waiting for her every morning. Already poured, already right, no sugar, a touch of cream, and always just warm enough to drink without blowing. Graham never said anything about it. The first time she found the cup by her workstation, she assumed it was a one-off, a courtesy. But the second day, and then the third, it became clear it was a ritual. His way of saying, "I see you." Their workdays had started to fall into a rhythm. Charlotte would arrive at the downstairs office by 8:15. Graham would already be there, reviewing layouts or standing by the window with his sleeves rolled and tie loose, staring at the trees like they held answers he hadn't yet found. Her job was precise review architectural drafts, compile schedules, coordinate video calls with their international partners, and, perhaps most importantly, catch the small mistakes before they became expensive problems. It was intense. At first, Graham was meticulous. He hated redundancy and detested being interrupted, but he never raised his voice. When something wasn't done right, he'd simply set the file aside, look at her with those winter gray eyes, and say, "Try again." At first, that cut deeper than any reprimand, but Charlotte learned, quickly, and something shifted. Graham began to trust her, not with words, never with declarations, but in gestures. He stopped double-checking every email draft. He started asking for her opinion instead of directing her to follow through. Once, when a vendor failed to meet a delivery deadline, he let her handle the negotiation entirely. And when she succeeded saving them both time and money, he didn't say good job. He simply handed her a second cup of coffee that morning and said, "Hazelnut today. Thought you might want something different." In Graham's speak, that was praise. Outside of work, their paths crossed gently like shadows at dusk. They might pass in the hallway, share a nod over dinner, or sit across from each other in the library without speaking. But something tender began to grow in the quiet. Not love, not yet, but recognition. One morning, it rained hard, the kind of southern downpour that seemed to arrive sideways, soaking the porch swing and streaking the windows with heavy lines. Charlotte stood by the front door, shoes in hand, weighing whether to run to the mailbox or wait it out. Then she noticed an umbrella leaning carefully against the wall, not placed there by accident, not part of the decor, just waiting for her. She smiled, just a little, then stepped outside under its shelter. That night, she found him still working, sleeves pushed up, glasses slipping down his nose. The lamp cast golden shadows across his desk. "You should take a break," she said gently, setting down a folder of finalized layouts. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You sound like my daughter." It was the first time he'd mentioned her. Charlotte sat across from him, but didn't press. She waited. "She's 17, he said after a pause. "Her name's Eliza. Brilliant, witty, better than I deserve." A faint ache colored his voice. Charlotte listened. "She used to call me every Sunday. Then it was once a month. Now," he trailed off, then shook his head. "I don't blame her." Charlotte could feel the air shift. Vulnerability wasn't something Graham wore easily. "Divorce?" she asked, softly. He nodded. 3 years ago. Mary Ann, her mother, made sure I got everything in the settlement except the one thing I cared about. Charlotte let that settle. He wasn't asking for pity. He was simply remembering aloud. "She still lives in Charleston?" she asked. "Yes, 20 minutes away. But it may as well be another country." He glanced toward the window, where the rain had begun to let up, the sky turning soft lavender. "I miss her," he said finally, "but I wouldn't know what to say if I saw her again." Charlotte thought of her own mother asleep upstairs, warm and safe, and wondered how many fathers felt this way and never found the words. "Maybe you don't need to say everything," she said gently. "Just start with showing up." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, Charlotte felt the quiet between them, stretched not like a distance, but like a bridge. Later that evening, after the house had grown hushed and the lights dimmed, Charlotte made tea and wandered onto the balcony. She brought 2 mugs out of habit, or hope, she couldn't be sure. Graham joined her not long after. They didn't speak much. The city murmured in the distance, frogs sang near the riverbank, and the wind carried in the scent of wet earth and honeysuckle. Charlotte leaned against the railing, one hand around her mug, the other resting along the iron bar. Graham stood beside her, not too close but not distant, either. A breeze lifted her hair. As she reached to brush it back, her fingers grazed his. She started to pull away instinct, caution, but something made her stop. Graham didn't move, didn't flinch, he just let it be. Their hands remained just barely touching, not entwined, not intentional, just there. And in that fragile moment, Charlotte felt something she hadn't in years. Not romance, not passion, but safety. A kind of stillness inside her, like the world had stopped demanding she defend herself. That night, as she lay in bed, the rain gone, the ceiling fan humming above her, Charlotte stared into the darkness and tried to name the feeling. It wasn't love, but it wasn't just work anymore, either. The past has a cruel way of knocking when you finally feel safe. Charlotte had just finished printing the revised project timeline when she heard the elevator doors slide open with a hush of compressed air. She didn't look up at first vendors, interns, and clients came through often, but the click of heels on polished floors was unmistakably intentional, sharp, performed. Then came the voice smooth, clipped, and just loud enough to be heard beyond the reception area. "Tell him it's Marianne. He'll want to see me." Charlotte glanced up, her fingers pausing mid-fold. The woman standing near the front desk looked like she had just walked off the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine, immaculately tailored navy coat, hair swept into a flawless chignon, lipstick that screamed control. So, this was her, Marianne Bennett, former wife, still holding court like nothing had changed. The receptionist hesitated, eyes darting to Charlotte, then back to the intercom. Charlotte lowered her gaze, hoping to disappear behind the folders she was organizing, but it was too late. Marianne had seen her. She tilted her head slightly, as if scanning a curiosity in a gallery. "So, you must be the assistant," she said, voice edged with something that wasn't quite venom, but wasn't far from it. Charlotte straightened but said nothing. She offered a polite nod and turned back toward the printer, behind her. The elevator dinged again. Graham stepped out. He stopped, just for a second. When he saw Marianne, then he adjusted his sleeve and walked forward with the calm of a man trained in corporate war zones. "Marianne," he said flatly, "you should have called." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "If I had, would you have answered?" They disappeared into his office, and the door clicked shut. Charlotte stared at the screen in front of her. She wasn't reading, just pretending to look busy, but her ears' traitorous things strained toward the muffled voices behind the glass. "I heard you have a live-in secretary now." Marianne's voice carried through the walls, just slightly. Charlotte froze. "She's not your type, Graham. She's not even in the same world as you." There was a pause. Then Graham's voice, lower, unreadable. "You came all this way to gossip. I came to warn you." Marianne replied, "You're slipping? The board's whispering. You used to be smarter than this." Charlotte felt her stomach twist. She didn't want to hear more, didn't want to stay frozen behind this screen like some underpaid spectator to her own humiliation. So she stood, picked up a manila envelope, any excuse, and walked toward the door. "Just stepping out for delivery," she told the receptionist. The girl nodded, her eyes kind. Outside, the Charleston sun was too bright, the air too warm for the cold she felt settling in her chest. She didn't go far, just walked down to the corner cafe and ordered a tea she didn't drink. She sat in the back, staring at a wall of mismatched frames and thinking about how quickly warmth could turn to doubt. It wasn't what Marianne had said. Not entirely. It was that Graham hadn't defended her. Not that she needed defending. She wasn't his girlfriend, wasn't even a friend, really, but he hadn't said anything, at least not loud enough for her to hear. And somehow, that silence rang louder than any insult. After 40 minutes, she returned to the office. Graham's door was open now, but he wasn't inside. "Left for a meeting?" the receptionist whispered. "Didn't say where." Charlotte nodded and returned to her desk, resuming work as if nothing had happened. But everything had. That night, the house on Rose Hill Drive was quiet, not the comforting kind, the other kind like a church after everyone has left, where echoes linger and every step feels like trespassing. Charlotte reheated leftover soup, ate it alone at the kitchen island. Graham wasn't home. Around 9, she changed into pajamas, sat on the living room couch with a book she didn't read, and stared at the fireplace that hadn't been lit in months. Then she heard it, a soft meow. Winston. The long-haired gray cat padded into the room like a shadow with a secret. He had never come this close before, always watching from doorways or brushing past her ankle with aloof indifference. But tonight, he jumped onto the couch, looked at her for a moment, then curled into a warm ball against her side. Charlotte let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She stroked Winston gently, his fur as soft as wool. For the first time all day, something felt okay. She didn't ask where Graham was when he returned after midnight. She heard the door, the soft click of his shoes across the foyer, the faint sound of water running in the kitchen. Then nothing. She didn't go down. And he didn't come up, But Winston stayed, and in that small, silent gesture, Charlotte found a thread of comfort, not because it solved anything, but because it said, "You're not invisible. Some truths come wrapped in paper, others in silence." It was just after 6 in the morning when Charlotte entered the study. The house was still asleep, cloaked in the kind of quiet that made her feel like an intruder in her own life. She wasn't due to start work for another hour, but her mind had been restless all night, tangled in threads she couldn't quite pull free. She hoped a head start might help untangle something, but what she found on her desk stopped her mid-step. A white envelope. No name, no markings, just placed there square in the center, as if someone wanted to make sure she didn't miss it. Her fingers hesitated before picking it up. Inside, a single black and white photograph slid out. Charlotte stared. It was her captured mid-step. Walking into the employment agency 3 days before, she'd spilled coffee on Graham Bennett's $4,000 jacket. She remembered the day-well-wrinkled blouse, tired eyes, hands clenched around a folder of resumes. The beginning of desperation, the kind she addressed in polite smiles and practicality. She turned the photo over. There, in neat handwriting. "You were never meant to belong here." The air around her seemed to shift, not colder, just heavier. She sat down slowly, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Someone knew, not just about her role, but about her past, about how she got there, about how close she'd let herself get to someone like Graham, and how far others thought she should stay. The message was clear. She was a stain on a polished floor. It wasn't just an insult, it was a warning. She sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope, trying to figure out who could have left it. Someone from inside the house, from the company, Marianne. She didn't know, and worse, she didn't have the strength to ask. She thought about confronting Graham, showing him the photo, demanding answers. But what if he already knew? What if this was his way of quietly pushing her out, avoiding another conversation that blurred the line between personal and professional? Her throat tightened, and then something inside her collapsed. Not loudly, not with tears or shaking hands, just quietly, like a paper being folded in half. By mid-morning, she had made up her mind. She pulled out a sheet of stationery from the drawer and began to write. "Mr. Bennett, I am grateful for the opportunity you've given me, more than I can say. But I believe it's time I step aside before this becomes more than either of us intended. Thank you for your trust, and for the coffee, and for seeing me when I forgot how to see myself. I wish you nothing but peace and good days. Warmly, Charlotte Hayes." She read it twice, then folded it into thirds and left it on his desk, back upstairs. She packed slowly, no rush, just deliberate motion, shirts rolled neatly, books stacked flat, toiletries tucked into zippered pouches. She wasn't leaving in anger. She wasn't running. She was releasing. The sun had just begun to rise when she wheeled her suitcase down the hallway. Winston sat by the staircase, tail curled around his paws, watching her. He didn't approach, just blinked once, as if to say, "I knew." "I'll miss you too," she whispered, brushing her hand gently over his back. She left the spare key on the entry table. The house didn't try to stop her. The front door closed with a hush, not a slam, not a goodbye, just a soft exhale. The bus stop wasn't far. 2 blocks down, past rows of manicured lawns and quiet porches still wrapped in dawn. She didn't call a car, didn't want the noise. The ritual of walking, dragging her suitcase across uneven pavement, felt necessary, like penance. She chose a window seat near the middle. The bus was nearly empty. A teenager with headphones, an older woman with grocery bags, a man in a suit sleeping with his forehead against the glass. Charlotte pulled out her phone, hesitated, then typed slowly, "Thank you for everything. I never meant to complicate your life. See." She stared at the message for a long moment, then hit send. The sun rose higher as the bus pulled out onto the road. Houses blurred past, fences, oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Every now and then, a glimpse of water. She leaned her head against the cool window and closed her eyes. She hadn't cried. Not yet. But the ache behind her ribs pulsed with every mile. For the first time in years, he left the office without turning off the lights. Graham stood in the middle of the hallway, Charlotte's resignation letter still trembling slightly in his hand. The paper was warm, not from the ink, but from her. He could tell she'd held it for a while before placing it on his desk. She hadn't signed it with regret or apology, just warmth, warmly, Charlotte Hayes. The name sat heavy on his tongue. The office around him blurred, the clean lines, the glass partitions, the open calendar on the wall with red ink circling deadlines. It all felt irrelevant. Suddenly, absurdly small. She was gone, and no one knew where. He searched her digital files first. No clues, no stray message, no pending tasks. Everything was wrapped up neatly, efficiently like her. Then he checked HR records. The official address on file was listed as the childhood home she'd once spoken of, the White House with the sagging porch and the fig tree that never bore fruit. Charleston blurred behind him as he drove. He didn't tell his assistant, didn't text a single soul. He left the office lights on, the reports untouched, his schedule abandoned. The further he got from the city, the quieter the road became. The homes turned older, cozier, fences covered in ivy, children on bikes, and eventually, a weathered wooden mailbox with haze painted in soft, fading blue. But the house was empty. He knocked anyway. A neighbor told him Charlotte was at the hospital. Something about her mother's treatment starting again. So, he drove another 20 minutes, this time slower. The weight of not knowing growing heavier with every passing field and stoplight. At the reception desk, he didn't use his name. Just said, "I'm here for Charlotte Hayes. She's with her mother." The nurse gave him a look, surprised, maybe a little curious, but eventually pointed him to the third floor. When he found her, she was sitting by the window of a small, sun-filled hospital room. Her mother was asleep, a soft blanket pulled up to her chin, IV line whispering quietly with each drip. Charlotte didn't see him at first. She was gently brushing her mother's hair back, the kind of gesture that spoke of years of love, not just obligation. He watched her for a moment longer than he should have. Then she turned. Her face didn't register shock, just quiet recognition, and a sigh that carried both weariness and peace. "You found me," she said softly. "You left," he replied. Charlotte stood, careful not to disturb the stillness of the room. "I had to. I would have understood." "No, you wouldn't," she cut in, her voice still calm but firm. "Not fully." They stepped out into the hallway, where the walls were pale green and smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon soap. "I didn't want to be the reason your name ended up in another headline," she continued. "You've worked too hard to be questioned. I don't care what they say," Graham replied. "You should," Charlotte said gently. "Because I do." He exhaled through his nose, as if trying to keep himself from unraveling. "You don't belong in my world, Graham," she said, repeating the words she'd been rehearsing in her mind since she boarded the bus. He didn't argue. He just looked at her and said, "Neither do I." That stopped her. "I don't belong in boardrooms and power lunches and luxury dinners," he went on. "I was good at it. I built it. But it never fit. Not really. Not since Eliza stopped answering my calls. Not since Mary Ann started managing my image more than my heart." Charlotte's eyes shimmered, but she blinked the emotion away. Graham reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin, rolled sheet of paper secured with a soft blue ribbon. He handed it to her. Cautiously, Charlotte untied the ribbon and unrolled the sheet. A blueprint, beautifully hand-rendered, a garden open, wide, winding, with benches, trees, a stone path, a children's area, a tiny library kiosk. In one corner, the name was printed in cursive script, Hayes Garden. She looked up at him, speechless. "I started it 3 weeks ago," he said, "when you told me about your mother's garden, about the swing, the porch, the summers that smelled like cinnamon and soil. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if trying to still her own heartbeat. "It's going to be the centerpiece of our next community project," he added. "A space for families, for healing, for memory." Charlotte clutched the blueprint like it was something living. "I wanted you to help design it," he continued, "but not as a contractor or a secretary. I want it to be yours, ours." Tears threatened again, but she held them back with a soft breath. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't say anything," Graham said gently. "Just tell me you'll think about staying." She looked back toward the room, where her mother still slept peacefully. Then she looked at him, not as the CEO, not as the man from the corner office with his guarded eyes and rolled sleeves, but as someone who, for the first time, had let himself show up not with authority, but with humility. "You're learning," she murmured. He smiled, just a little. "I've had a good teacher." They stood there in the hallway, not holding hands, not making promises, but surrounded by a silence that no longer felt like absence. Charlotte didn't answer yet, but she didn't turn away, and that, somehow, was enough for now. The garden didn't bloom overnight, neither did she. It took months of careful tending, of waiting, of letting roots settle before anything could grow. But one quiet Sunday morning, almost a year after Charlotte Hayes had stepped away from the world of polished boardrooms and unspoken hierarchies, Hayes Garden opened its gates to the people of Charleston. There were no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, no camera crews, just families, children running along stone pathways, elderly couples sitting beneath sycamores, a local musician strumming gentle chords beneath a pergola wrapped in wisteria. Charlotte stood near the entrance, dressed in soft linen, her hair swept back, watching quietly as the world moved gently through the space she once only dreamed of. The sun filtered through the trees in dapples of gold, the scent of soil, lavender, and new beginnings lingered in the air. Behind her, Graham was speaking to a group of city officials and community volunteers, his tone calm and warm, a far cry from the clipped corporate cadence he once carried like armor. He no longer needed armor, not here, not with her. They lived in a small house by the river now, 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a kitchen that smelled of rosemary and morning toast. Graham had insisted on building the bookshelves himself, and though slightly crooked, Charlotte refused to let anyone touch them. Each evening, they sat on that porch often with Winston curled at their feet sipping tea or wine, listening to the cicadas hum and the river whisper its slow, eternal song. Graham had begun to reconnect with Eliza, his daughter. It hadn't been easy. The first meeting was stiff, polite, but not warm. The second one had ended with laughter, and the third at the garden had ended with an embrace. Charlotte never asked for details. She simply gave him space to find his way back to fatherhood, one message, one moment, one visit at a time. As for her, she'd started a community class in design and creative planning, hosted in the town's library twice a week. Not many people showed up at first, but the ones who did came back, and they brought friends. One student, a retired firefighter, had taken to sketching birdhouses with surprising elegance. Another, a teenage girl who barely spoke the first 3 weeks, now stayed late to ask questions and share her portfolio. Charlotte never raised her voice in those classes, never demanded. She simply offered, gently, like holding out seeds and waiting to see which ones would catch the wind. Her mother passed away quietly one evening in late spring. The nurse said she'd gone peacefully, her breathing slow, then slower, then still. Charlotte had been there, holding her hand, humming the lullaby her mother used to sing during summer storms. In the days that followed, there were tears, yes, but not the unraveling kind. Grief came to Charlotte like fog, soft, constant, touching everything but never fully consuming her. She found comfort in rituals, folding the blankets just as her mother used to, cooking her favorite cinnamon apple compote on Sundays, tending to the small flower bed outside their house where peonies now bloomed in quiet tribute. A few days after the funeral, Graham handed her a sealed envelope. She wrote this. He said, For me? Charlotte nodded, surprised. You read it, I waited, he said, until I was ready. She didn't ask what it said, and he didn't offer. But that evening, he held her hand longer than usual, pressed a kiss to her forehead before bed, and whispered, she saw us. You know, before we did. Summer rolled in with its golden heat and drifting clouds. The garden bloomed in full lavender, rosemary, daisies, oak saplings, and an entire row of rose bushes named after local women who had contributed to the project. And on one particular evening, with the sky streaked in burnt orange and soft plum, Charlotte found herself sitting on a hand-carved bench beneath the fig tree they had planted in the center. It was Graham's idea, a tribute to the one that had never borne fruit at her childhood home. This one had, as she sat, fingers brushing the soft grain of the wood, Graham approached. He didn't wear a suit, just khakis and a soft blue shirt, sleeves rolled. The sun caught the silver in his hair. There were laugh lines near his eyes now, ones he didn't hide anymore. He sat beside her, thigh just barely touching hers. I used to think peace came after success, he said quietly. And now she asked, now I think peace is what happens when you stop running from yourself. A pause. Winston, ever punctual, padded past them toward the nearby shade, where a pair of sparrows were quarreling over crumbs. Charlotte chuckled softly. He's getting braver. So am I. Graham replied. She looked at him then, and saw not the man who had once sat in a corner office with steel in his gaze, but the one who stood in her mother's kitchen, trying to cook scrambled eggs and burning toast, the one who held her hand through the silence, the one who had chosen her not in spite of their differences, but because of them. Graham reached into his pocket, pulled out a small ring box, and opened it. No speech, no grand gesture, just the two of them, the garden, and a single whispered line, I want to grow old with you in the quiet. Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. No dress, no aisle, no fanfare, just a bench, a garden, and two people who had finally stopped running. That night, Charlotte placed the ring on the windowsill beside a small ceramic bird her mother had once gifted her. Winston curled into his usual spot at the foot of the bed, stretching once before settling into sleep. Graham reached for her hand beneath the covers, and as the night deepened and the garden swayed gently outside in the moonlight, Charlotte Hayes, once dismissed, once doubted, breathed in the stillness. She had not just found love, she had found home. Sometimes, life doesn't fall apart. It quietly unravels one thread at a time until you wake up one day and realize you're not where you thought you'd be. But that's not the end. Charlotte's story reminds us that dignity isn't found in big victories, but in small choices made with grace. The choice to walk away quietly, to care for someone you love, even when your own heart is breaking. To begin again, not because you have to, but because your soul needs it. And Graham's journey tells us it's never too late to soften, to listen, to love, even if the world has taught you not to. The garden they built wasn't just a place of beauty. It was a testament to everything they had lost and everything they had chosen to rebuild. So, if you find yourself standing at the edge of something broken, remember, you don't have to fix it all today. You just have to plant one seed and let the quiet do its work. Thank you so much for being here with Shining Stories and listening to this journey. If this story touched your heart or gave you a moment of peace, please give it a like, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking together on this path of inspiring stories.